Cover story tonight. It's election day in Russia for the next president, who is most likely to be the incumbent, meaning Vladimir Putin. He's eyeing another term, his fourth, as president of Russia. A landslide victory is expected. Let's get you the flavor from polling stations and ground reports from Russia before we decode the trends and analyze the implications of another term for Mr. Putin. Polling began in the far east region of Chukotka and Kamchatka at 8 p.m. GMT on Saturday. Polling is expected to end today at 6 p.m. GMT owing to the wide time difference between the two ends of the world's largest nation. In fact, it's going to last 22 hours and it will span 11 time zones. That's how big Russia is. The Russian Election Commission claims that the turnout will be higher than that in 2012. Some reports saying 5-0, that is. We're waiting for the latest numbers. Listen in.
Хорошо, коллеги, явка на 2 часа сегодняшнего дня. По России то, что мне дали сейчас, 34,72%. Хочу отметить, что эта явка вновь показывает, что по большинству регионов она существенно выше того, что было на 2012 год.
Not everyone is convinced. Independent observers monitoring online streaming of the polling process have shared links of footage showing ballot stuffing and an unfair practice where one person submits multiple ballots. Opposition observers claim that the figures being projected by the Election Commission are not true.
И мы видим, что в некоторых субъектах федерации, по крайней мере, там, где уже закончились выборы, так называемые выборы, по данным наших наблюдателей, явка ниже, чем была в 2012 году, даже с учетом всего того давления, которое...
President Putin turned up at a polling station in Moscow at 8 a.m. local time to cast his ballot. On being questioned what would be a winning margin for him, this is what the not-so-modest leader had to say.
Любовь, что дает право исполнять должность президента. Я уверен в правильности той программы, которую предлагают наши президенты.
His confidence seems to have gotten the better of his rivals too. Ksenia Sobchak, a socialite turned opposition figure, seems to have conceded defeat already.
Считаю, что мы должны все голосовать за единого оппозиционного кандидата. Это единственный шанс на перемену. То, сколько процентов получит Путин на этих выборах, напрямую зависит от того, сколько оппозиционно настроенных граждан придет на голосование. Вы должны это понимать, это математика. Чем больше нас придет, тем меньше будет процент у Путина.
Unlike most other national elections, Russian polls were not just plain domestic affairs. While residents of Crimea voted in the polls for the first time after the peninsula was annexed by Russia from Ukraine, Kiev tried its level best to avert any showdown on election day. Ukraine's authorities dispatched National Guard and police on outside Russian diplomatic missions in Kiev to prevent Russian citizens from voting in this presidential election.
Жодного росіянина, жодного ворога України ми не запустимо і російському ворожим виборам на території України на місці. Слава нації!
President Vladimir Putin has dominated the Russian political landscape for close to 2 decades now, and today's elections are all set to give him another term, which will end in 2024, after which he's constitutionally bound to step down unless he plans to pull off a Xi Jinping, change the constitution, become president for life. So the result for now may be a foregone conclusion, and the 7 other contenders may not even be remembered as also rans, but we decided to introduce you to them anyway. After all, they took on Vladimir Putin for whatever it was worth. My colleague Aisha Sindhu gets you the lowdown.
Right, so there are 8 candidates in the Russian presidential elections this time around. We're going to take you through each of those names now. Let's start first with the first candidate, that is Sergei Baburin. He is 59 years old and from the Russian All People's Union. In the past, of course, he has been a federal lawmaker and a lawmaker in the State Duma, which is the lower house of Russia's legislature. He's held that position for a number of years. He's also been the leader of his party, that's the Russian All People's Union, from 2011 to now, the current year, that's 2018. The second candidate in the fray is Pavel Grudinin. He is from the Communist Party. He's 57. He's been a provincial lawmaker in the legislature of Moscow between 1997 and 2011. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, 71 years old. He's been a liberal, part of the Liberal Democratic Party and a federal lawmaker in the State Duma from 1993 till the current date. So another Vladimir in the fray. He's also been a leader of his party from 1991 to 2018. The other Vladimir needs no introduction at all. Mr. Putin has been in power for a long time, 2000 to 2008, 2012 to present. He is, of course, trying for a fourth term. He's also been the Prime Minister of the country, interestingly, at the turn of the millennium, and then again between 2008 and 2012 when his protege Dmitry Medvedev was the president. He has been the leader of the United Russia Party, but interestingly, he started as an independent this time around. He's also been the director of the Federal Security Service from 1998 to 1999. The other woman, or the only woman I should say, in the fray is Ksenia Sobchak. She is from the Civic Initiative Party. She is just 36 years old. She's a television anchor and journalist. She's the first woman candidate in 14 years, interestingly, and the youngest one since 2004. The other interesting factor about Ms. Sobchak is she's the daughter of Anatoly Sobchak. Now, Anatoly himself was the first democratically elected mayor of St. Petersburg. So she does have a past in politics. In fact, he mentored Vladimir Putin back in the 1990s. So that is a little bit about Ksenia Sobchak. In 1991, in fact, her father helped launch Mr. Putin's career in politics, of all the things. Now, Anatoly also taught law to Putin and Dmitry Medvedev at the Leningrad State University. So that's a little bit about Ksenia Sobchak. Maxim Suryakin is the other young candidate in the fray. He's 39 from the Communist of Russia party. He's the chairman of the Central Committee of the Communists of Russia. He's held that position from 2012 till date. The other man in the fray is Boris Titov. He's from the Party of Growth. He's 57. He's a leader of the Party of Growth from 2016 till the current date. He's also been Presidential Commissioner for Entrepreneurs' Rights in Russia. Grigor Yavlinsky from the Yabloko party. He is 65 years old, as is the current president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. He's been the chairman of his party. He's also been a federal lawmaker in the State Duma all the way from 1993 to 2003. He is one of those 8 contenders trying to dislodge President Putin. He's also been a provincial lawmaker in the legislature of St. Petersburg for 7 years, from 2011, or pardon me, for 5 years till 2016. So that's a look at some of the candidates who are in the fray this time around, who are trying to give President Putin a run for his money. The question, though, is will they be able to? It is a foregone conclusion for many that Mr. Putin is going to win. We'll have to wait and watch as far as the results go. And the key factor, of course, is going to be voter turnout.
Now, kudos to the other contenders for standing up against him. An interesting facet of this year's Russian presidential election is the participation of voters in Crimea for the first time since Russia took over this peninsula in 2014. WION's Ramesh Ramachandran delves into the recent history of Crimea to understand what this means for Russia and Putin alike.
Crimea is a peninsula on the northern coast of the Black Sea in Eastern Europe, slightly bigger than the northeast Indian state of Meghalaya. It has a population of 22 million. 4 years to the day after Russia annexed Crimea, they vote for the first time to elect the president of Russia. In 2014, Crimea was the scene of conflict between Russia and Ukraine. On 11th March that year, Crimea's Supreme Council and the Sevastopol City Council adopted a declaration of independence. On the 16th, Crimeans voted in a referendum for reuniting with Russia. And on 18th March, Vladimir Putin signed a treaty on Crimea's reunification with Russia, which Russia's legislature approved on the 21st. As it turns out, the Russian presidential election this year is being held on the 4th anniversary of annexation of Crimea. A bigger turnout today than the 2014 referendum would burnish Russia's image and Putin's reputation. Putin visited the peninsula earlier this week. He addressed a crowd in the historic naval port of Sevastopol. Before arriving in Crimea, Putin visited the construction site of a bridge that would link the peninsula with Russian territories across the Kerch Strait. Ramesh Ramachandran, WION.
Our next report examines the past to understand the present and make sense of the future trajectory of the India-Russia special and privileged strategic partnership.
One is a judo enthusiast and the other a fan of yoga. Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi may not have tried their hands at each other's favorite pastimes, but they share a relationship like no other. And it shows in the time-tested and multifaceted India-Russia cooperation covering every field of human endeavour. As Modi said last year at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, there is an underlying trust in our relations and they have grown stronger and deeper with time. Putin and Modi are slated to meet for the 19th annual India-Russia summit in October this year. The fifth such summit between them since Modi came to power in 2014. This was the year when Putin signed deals worth $100 billion in less than 24 hours that he spent in New Delhi. And Modi and he issued the document called Druzhba Dosti, a vision for strengthening the Indian-Russian partnership over the next decade. Druzhba and Dosti are the Russian and Hindi words for friendship. On the occasion, Modi had said that even if India's options have increased, Russia remains our most important defense partner. India and Russia are collaborating in many spheres, including but not limited to fifth-generation fighter jets, multi-role transport aircraft, construction of frigates, nuclear reactors, energy security, aircraft carrier, nuclear-powered submarine, and the Sukhoi jets. Today, India and Russia are working for joint manufacture of Kamov 226 twin-engined military helicopters. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, the intergovernmental agreement on the manufacture of Kamov 226 helicopters in India is the first project for a major defense platform under the Make in India mission. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says Putin's leadership has provided stability and substance to the India-Russia special and privileged strategic partnership. He quotes the Russian proverb to best illustrate his point: an old friend is better than two new friends. With Ramesh Ramachandran, Bureau Report, WION.
And joining us this evening is a special panel, Roman Dobrokhatov. He's the journalist and editor-in-chief of The Insider, with us from Moscow. Fred Weir, Russian affairs expert, also from Moscow. And Stephen Golub, international affairs analyst, with us from California. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for joining us here on Gravitas. Roman, let me begin with you. Why is Vladimir Putin tipped to win? In the last 2 decades, has Russia failed to produce any leader who can take him on, or has he quashed dissent despite the ostensible show that there are other contenders? There are 8 people in the fray, but he is the overwhelming favorite.
Well, that is pretty easy to win if you have no one to compete with. If you ban all oppositionals from the participation in these elections, like Alexei Navalny and the other oppositioners who were not led to participate. That's why actually opposition is boycotting these elections. So all of the contenders we see now are actually those people who are cooperating with the administration of the president, and some of them, like Ksenia Sobchak, for example, they even didn't want really to participate. So administration of the president had to persuade them for a long time to play in this political theater. But I know there are lots of people who really believe that this is what's happening, so that this is a real elections. So that works for maybe even millions of Russian people. But I think all of the educated Russian people, they understand what's going on.
Fred, do you agree, sitting in Moscow, are these other contenders then seen as props, and how do you assess the public sentiment? Do people believe that Vladimir Putin is the right leader for them? And in India, we often use the term the Tina factor. There is no alternative, so you vote for a president. Is Vladimir Putin still seen as the man who will restore that former glory to this country?
See, I think it's a little bit of both. There is no doubt that there is a stage management taking place of the elections, that the ballot is weeded and manicured to shape. But it's also the fact.
Right, we seem to have lost the audio there. Let me take this question, Stephen Golub. Stephen, is this an election then in the real sense of the word, or just an exercise to conform to the Russian constitution in letter, perhaps, not in spirit?
Really just an exercise. As your Russian guest pointed out, Alexei Navalny, the leading opposition figure, has been banned from participating in terms of longer-term efforts to suppress dissent, to suppress opposition. You have opposition figures such as Boris Nemtsov dead. You have some prominent and very reputable journalists and other opposition figures dead or in jail. Independent human rights and civic groups being suppressed or banned or jailed. So really, technically, this is an election. People are voting, but the underlying reality is that this is much closer to a sham than a real exercise in democracy.
Roman, what does another term for Vladimir Putin, another 6 years in power for him, mean for Russians? How do they see their own life changing, the Russian economy, jobs, etc.?
Well, I don't think that really lots of people care about these elections, though many of them were forced to participate in them, like officials or those who work in governmental sector, as like doctors, teachers. So they were like obliged to participate. There were buses that carrying them to like electoral points. We saw the last time we saw that was in Soviet Union, like 28 years ago. So it's both like funny and scary a little bit. But what is really interesting is that Putin is going to turn into a lame duck soon, because he will have to think how he will manage to be the president after these 6 years. Constitution does not let him opportunity to be president forever, so he has to either to change constitution like in China they did, or he has to like think of his representative like Dmitry Medvedev. But that is also risky now, because there is like conflict inside elites. Not a lot of people under sanctions want to be Putin president forever. So already right now we see that there are some like problems inside political elites starting right after these elections.
Fred, is that how you assess the situation as well? Because from where we are, Vladimir Putin is synonymous with Russia, and it seems 6 years is a long time in politics, and he's consolidated his power. He's pushing technocrats and young leaders to take over from him, but that's $1 million question. When will he give up? Would you also say that this is going to be a lame duck presidency?
Well, yes, and I would like to contradict my colleague.
Okay, I do apologize to the viewers. We seem to be having some trouble with that line. Stephen, this is also an election that is coming under the shadow of a lot of controversy, whether it be in Syria or the spy poisoning case. Do you think that it may have buttressed Putin's image as a strong leader who's standing up to the rest of the world while Russia is being vilified?
In that sense, yes, within Russia. And if Roman or Fred want to dispute what I'm about to say, I'd welcome their insights on this. I do think it's fair to say that even if this were a free election, Putin has manipulated public opinion through his foreign adventurism and the like, to the point where the majority of Russians feel that he's a strong leader, he's what the country needs, as well as, of course, suppressing dissent that would argue against that. But so in that limited sense, he's been successful at projecting himself as a strong leader that's taking Russia back onto the world stage after the humiliations of the problems of the 1990s. In a deeper sense, though, he really has been a failure economically. Reductions of 20% over the past 4 years in standards of living, increased poverty rates. structural problems in terms of being dependent on natural resources, which makes Russia much more like Nigeria or Saudi Arabia, as opposed to a modern economy or one that's moving ahead through entrepreneurship, innovative social programs, poverty reduction, such as India, for example, for all of your problems, and deep-seated corruption, as evidenced by the Panama Papers, the result of investigations by a consortium of international journalists that reveal that, at the very least, he has in effect stolen billions of dollars and maybe even more than that. So, yes, he's projecting an image of strength. In the short term, he's successful, but there are deep-seated economic and structural problems and looming political problems that call into question how long any of this will last.
Very quickly, Stephen, I want to ask you one more question. How do you see India-Russia ties under Vladimir Putin?
Well, you know, watch what you wish for in terms of ties with Vladimir Putin. He could be your friend today, or you're destabilizing your democracy tomorrow. I'm speaking from my U.S. experience. A few years ago, if someone had said, who might the Russians favor in a U.S. election, you might have said the Democrats. Now it turns out he's in bed with, in effect, with Donald Trump by Donald Trump's actions and inactions regarding Russia aggression and interference with our power grid, our democracy. So if you've got good relations with Russia now that's productive to your country, well, okay, that might be good for the time being, but this is not someone you could trust over the long term on any number of levels.
Roman, while we look at India-Russia ties, a lot of observers in India say that he is the last of the Soviet-era leaders, and he understands the sensibilities. He understands where India and Russia are coming from and the old ties and so on and so forth. After him, there'll be a new generation of leaders, and it might not be the same. But what about Russians? Is there a disconnect between their leader and the millennials? Do they understand what this former KGB spy turned president is trying to do to their country, and do they agree, more importantly, with what his plans are?
Well, speaking about India, I think that the vast majority of Russians don't really understand what the real international relations between our countries are. For Vladimir Putin, it's of course the continuation of Soviet time relations with India, but that can continue only if India is really loyal to Vladimir Putin, if India is not protesting against violations of human rights or intervention in Ukraine or in American elections. So I would agree that that this is not really trustworthy relations right now. And speaking about young generation, I think that right now young generation is the most oppositional part of the country because they don't watch TV, so they consume information differently. And all the propaganda is now going through TV set, though they try to obtain more control over internet, but still they're not very successful there. So these people who are 18, 19, actually they already were born under Putin's power. They are the main protest energy right now. Thousands of them were protesting in the middle, in the central streets in Moscow.
Right, Roman and Stephen, thanks very much. That's all we have time for, but appreciate you both joining us. While we are on the subject of elections, ever wondered why India cannot have a set date for polls? Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said time and again that it's eminently doable. He's called for a nationwide debate on one nation, one poll.
In an interview to WION's sister channel Z News in January, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that, like festivals, election schedule should be fixed so that all polls are held within a limited period, enabling the federal and provincial governments to focus on governance for 5 years. He cited the example of the festival of Holi, during which people throw color and even mud at each other, but it is done only on that one day. First, let's play out the relevant portion from that interview.
साल में एक निश्चित समय हो, जब होली होते भी एक निश्चित समय रंग डाल दो, फिर साल भर नहीं डालते, तो कीचड़ उछाल दो, रंग डाल दो, जो होली के समय काट लेते हैं। चुनाव भी एक उत्सव की तरह निश्चित समय काल में होने चाहिए और लोकसभा और विधानसभा के साथ होने चाहिए।
What the Indian Prime Minister says is not without merit. Take the case of Russia. Last year, Russia enacted a law fixing the third Sunday of March as the date for presidential elections. Today is the third Sunday of March. Accordingly, Russians are voting to elect the president. The date of the next Russian presidential election in 2024 is known too, 17 March. Russia is not alone. The United States presidential elections are held on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in the month of November. It's the third Monday of October for Canada, fourth Sunday of October for Argentina, and the second Monday of May for the Philippines. So, what's India waiting for? Ramesh Ramachandran, WION.
Preliminary results will be out tomorrow, which are most likely going to be the final results. So stay tuned to WION for the very latest on Russia elections. But coming back to what's happening here in India, after launching a blistering attack against the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party yesterday, the Indian National Congress Party President Rahul Gandhi once again trained his guns on the Modi-led government on day 2 of the 84th annual plenary session of his party in New Delhi. Listen in.
The Prime Minister diverts our attention. He jumps from one event to another. Surgical strikes to demonetization, Gabbar Singh tax to a fancy yoga parade in front of Parliament. The Prime Minister diverts our attention. He jumps from one event to another. Surgical strikes to demonetization, Gabbar Singh tax to a fancy yoga parade in front of Parliament. No one, no matter how powerful, can silence us, can silence the Congress Party from seeking justice for the people of India. They tell the millions of Muslims who never went to Pakistan and supported our great nation, you don't belong here. They tell the Tamils, change your beautiful language. They tell the people from the Northeast, we don't like what you eat. They tell women, dress properly or we'll thrash you. So what does Modi actually mean? What does Modi actually mean? The name Modi symbolizes the collusion between India's biggest crony capitalist and the Prime Minister of India.
Strong words there. We're wrapping up this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.